It began with a knock on the precinct door, or rather, a scratch. The sound was so faint at first that Officer Megan Harlow barely noticed it. She had been sipping lukewarm coffee, halfway through her shift, and scrolling absent-mindedly through paperwork. The station was unusually quiet for a Friday night. No loud arguments, no urgent calls blaring over the radio. A peaceful night, some might say. But then came the scratch again, louder this time. Megan frowned, glancing at the door. "Did anyone hear that?" she asked, looking around. A couple of officers seated at their desks barely lifted their heads. Sergeant Brooks, lounging by the coffee machine, snorted. "Relax, Harlow. Probably just the wind." But Megan knew better. It wasn't the wind. She set her coffee down and walked toward the entrance. As she neared the door, the scratching turned into a series of soft but insistent thuds, as though something or someone was trying to get in. Her pulse quickened. The precinct wasn't exactly in the safest part of town, and her mind raced with possibilities. Was it a distressed civilian? A prank? Or worse? She opened the door cautiously, hand hovering over her holstered firearm, just in case. But what she found on the other side left her momentarily speechless. A cat. It wasn't just any cat. It was thin, so thin that its ribs were visible through its patchy, matted fur. Its once bright coat was dull and dirty, and one of its ears was torn, as if it had survived more battles than most street animals should. But what struck Megan the most were its eyes. Wide, unblinking, and unervingly human. They weren't the eyes of a typical stray looking for food. They were eyes that seemed to plead for something. The cat let out a long, mournful meow, its voice almost hoarse. Megan crouched down, her police instincts battling her softer side. "Hey there, buddy," she said softly, extending a hand. The cat didn't flinch or back away. Instead, it sat firmly on the cold concrete, as though it had been waiting for her all along. "Well, that's a first," one of the officers behind her called out, breaking the spell. Megan glanced over her shoulder to see Officer Jenkins leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, grinning. "What's the matter, Harlow? Someone finally called you for backup." The room erupted in laughter. Even Sergeant Brooks chuckled, shaking his head as he refilled his coffee cup. "Maybe it's a sign," he said. "Detective Doolittle over here finally found her calling." Megan rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the small smile tugging at her lips. She'd earned the nickname Detective Doolittle early in her career, thanks to her habit of rescuing animals she found on patrol. Stray dogs, injured birds, even a snake once if it needed help, Megan was the one to step in. But this felt different. Ignoring the jeers, she turned back to the cat. It meowed again, louder this time, and then startling her it turned and began walking away. It stopped a few feet down the sidewalk and looked back at her, as if waiting. "Looks like it wants you to follow it," Jenkins said, smirking. "Or maybe it's leading her to a dumpster full of kittens," Brooks added with a chuckle. Megan straightened, brushing off the comments. "Laugh all you want," she said, grabbing her jacket. "I'm going to check it out." "Seriously?" Jenkins asked, raising an eyebrow. "Seriously," Megan replied. The cat, as if sensing her decision, began walking again, its tail twitching. Megan followed, feeling the weight of the officer's stares behind her. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of rain from earlier in the evening. The cat moved with surprising purpose, its thin frame darting down alleys and across quiet streets. Megan kept a few paces behind, her flashlight cutting through the shadows. Every so often, the cat would stop and look back, as if making sure she was still there. Megan couldn't help but feel a strange connection to it, like it was more than just an animal leading her on a wild goose chase. Her radio crackled. "Harlow, you good?" Brooks's voice came through, tinged with amusement. Fine, she replied. Just following a lead. Yeah, a cat lead, Jenkins chimed in, laughter in the background. Megan sighed but didn't respond. She had a gut feeling, the kind she'd learned not to ignore during her years on the force. This wasn't a wild chase. The cat had come to the station for a reason. The trail led them to an older part of town, where the street lights flickered and the sidewalks were cracked. Megan's boots echoed against the pavement, the sound a stark contrast to the cat's silent, nimble steps. They turned a corner, and the cat stopped abruptly in front of a rusted chain-link fence. Beyond it was an abandoned warehouse, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. The cat sat down, its gaze fixed on the building. Megan's heart raced. She reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Harlow. I'm at the old Baxter warehouse on 9th Street. Requesting backup for a possible investigation." "Copy that, Harlow," came the reply. "Units are en route." Megan crouched next to the cat, her hand resting lightly on her holstered weapon. "What are you trying to show me?" she murmured. The cat didn't move. It simply stared at the warehouse, its tail flicking with quiet determination. The backup officers arrived within minutes, their flashing lights illuminating the desolate street. Sergeant Brooks stepped out of his cruiser, his earlier amusement replaced by curiosity. "Harlow," he said, walking over. "You better have a good reason for dragging us out here." Megan nodded toward the warehouse. "Something's not right about this place," she said. Brooks raised an eyebrow. "And the cat told you that?" Megan ignored him, her focus on the building. The cat stood up suddenly, letting out a loud, almost urgent meow. It darted toward the warehouse's side entrance, slipping through a gap in the fence. Megan followed, her flashlight sweeping the area. "I think we should take a look inside," she said. Brooks sighed but waved for the other officers to follow. "Fine," he said. "But if this turns out to be nothing, you're buying donuts for a week." Megan smirked but didn't reply. Her attention was on the cat, now sitting by the door as if guarding it. Her fingers tightened around her flashlight as she pushed the door open, stepping into the unknown. The warehouse door groaned as Megan pushed it open, the sound echoing through the still night like a warning. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a dusty, forgotten interior. Broken crates and rusted tools were scattered across the floor, and cobwebs hung like curtains in every corner. The cat slipped inside, its small frame disappearing into the shadows with ease. Megan hesitated on the threshold, her hand brushing the grip of her holstered gun. "This is probably nothing," she murmured to herself, though the unease curling in her stomach said otherwise. Behind her, Sergeant Brooks and the other officers approached cautiously. "Harlow, you seriously dragged us out here because of a cat?" Brooks asked, his voice low but edged with annoyance. Megan turned her head slightly, keeping her flashlight steady on the path ahead. "It's not just about the cat," she replied. "There's something off about this place. I can feel it." Brooks sighed heavily but motioned for the others to follow. "All right, let's make it quick." In and out. The team moved inside, their footsteps crunching against the debris-strewn floor. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. The faint smell of oil and mildew lingered, and every step seemed to stir up a cloud of particles that danced in the flashlight beams. The cat reappeared a few feet ahead, sitting perfectly still in the center of the room. Its unblinking eyes reflected the light like tiny mirrors, and its tail flicked impatiently. Megan's heart thudded in her chest. It was as if the animal was waiting for them to catch up. "Okay, this is officially weird," Officer Jenkins muttered, gripping his flashlight tightly. Megan knelt, lowering her flashlight to meet the cat's gaze. "What is it, buddy? What are you trying to show us?" she asked softly. The cat let out a low, guttural meow, a sound that sent a chill down her spine. It turned and began moving again, weaving through the maze of debris with purpose. Megan rose to her feet and followed, the others trailing behind her reluctantly. "Stay sharp," Brooks said, his tone shifting to something more serious. They moved deeper into the warehouse, the space growing darker and colder with every step. The cat led them through a narrow hallway lined with peeling paint and broken light fixtures. The floor beneath their boots felt uneven, as if the building had been forgotten by time and left to decay. "Anyone else feel like we're walking into a horror movie?" Jenkins joked, though his nervous laugh betrayed his unease. Megan didn't reply. Her focus was on the cat, which had stopped again at the end of the hallway. It sat next to a heavy metal door, its paw tapping against the surface as though trying to draw their attention. "Is it knocking?" one of the officers asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Megan stepped closer, her flashlight revealing a set of deep scratches on the door. They weren't fresh, but they were deliberate, as if something or someone had tried to claw their way through. "Looks like this door's seen some action," Brooks said, running his fingers over the gouges. "Think we should open it?" Megan nodded, her grip tightening on her flashlight. "We didn't come all this way to stop now." Brooks gestured to Jenkins, who reluctantly moved forward and grabbed the door handle. It took some effort, but with a loud creak, the door swung open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. A collective sense of unease settled over the group. The air wafting up from the staircase was damp and cool, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. "Basement," Jenkins muttered. "Of course it's a basement." The cat meowed again, louder this time, and darted down the stairs without hesitation. Megan took a deep breath, her flashlight beam steady as she stepped onto the first creaking stair. "Let's go," she said firmly. The descent felt endless. Each step groaned under their weight, and the darkness seemed to press in around them. The faint sound of dripping water echoed in the distance, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. When they finally reached the bottom, they found themselves in a cavernous space that didn't match the rest of the warehouse's decrepit appearance. The walls were lined with concrete, and the floor was smooth and polished. It felt more like a bunker than a basement. "What the hell is this place?" Brooks muttered, his voice low. Megan's flashlight swept across the room, illuminating rows of strange equipment, large metal tanks, tangled wires, and monitors covered in dust. A desk in the corner was piled high with yellowed papers and folders, some of them marked with red stamps. "This isn't just an old warehouse," Megan said, her voice barely above a whisper. The cat jumped onto the desk, knocking over a stack of papers. Megan hurried over, her flashlight revealing a diagram beneath the clutter. It was a blueprint of the warehouse, but with an extensive network of underground tunnels marked beneath it. "Looks like this place was more than it seemed," Jenkins said, peering over her shoulder. Brooks grabbed one of the folders, flipping through its contents. His expression grew darker with each page. "These are shipping manifests," he said. "Dates, names, locations, and none of it looks legal." A faint noise interrupted them, a soft clinking sound, like metal on metal. The group froze, their flashlights darting toward the far end of the room. "Did anyone else hear that?" Megan asked, her voice tense. "Yeah," Brooks replied, his hand moving to his holstered weapon. "Stay close." They moved cautiously toward the source of the noise, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The clinking grew louder, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic tapping. As they rounded a corner, their flashlights illuminated a steel cage. Inside was a man, his clothes tattered and his face gaunt. His wrists were bound with chains, and he was tapping a small piece of metal against the bars in a desperate attempt to create noise. "Help me," he croaked, his voice barely audible. Megan's heart pounded as she rushed forward, signaling for the others to cover her. "It's okay," she said gently. "We're here to help." The man's eyes widened with relief, but his gaze flicked past her, landing on the cat that had now perched itself on top of the cage. It found you, he whispered. Megan frowned. What do you mean? The cat, he said, his voice trembling. It's the only reason I'm still alive. Life as a rookie officer wasn't glamorous, and Megan Harlow knew it better than anyone. Late nights, endless paperwork, and the constant feeling that no one really took her seriously. It wasn't just the workload, it was the way her fellow officers treated her. Detective Doolittle strikes again, Sergeant Brooks said with a grin, his voice carrying over the idle chatter of the precinct. He leaned back in his chair, coffee in hand, and gestured toward Megan with mock enthusiasm. How many animals is that now, Harlow? You running a zoo out of your apartment? The room erupted in laughter. Megan, used to the ribbing, forced a tight smile as she scratched behind the stray cat's tattered ear. The poor thing was trembling, its thin body pressed tightly against her leg as if it had finally found a safe harbor. Its eyes, wide and imploring, never left her face. Maybe she'll bring in a goat next time, Officer Jenkins added, smirking as he twirled a pen between his fingers. Or a raccoon, someone else chimed in. Megan tried to ignore them, but the comments stung. She wasn't sure when she'd become the precinct's favorite punchline, but the nickname Detective Doolittle had stuck almost immediately after she'd joined the force. All because she'd stopped to help a few animals during her patrols. Okay, maybe more than a few. But could they really blame her for having a heart? Bet she's gonna add this one to her zoo, Brooks continued, his grin widening. Megan sighed, keeping her attention on the cat. She had learned long ago not to take the teasing personally, but tonight, the stakes felt different. This wasn't just another stray in need of food or shelter. There was something about this cat, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Its desperation was palpable, and the way it darted to the door, pausing every few seconds to make sure she was following, was unlike anything she'd seen before. I think it wants us to go somewhere, Megan said aloud, mostly to herself. That got their attention. Brooks raised an eyebrow. It wants us to go somewhere? Oh, well, why didn't you say so? Let me just grab my leash and collar, he quipped, earning another round of laughter from the room. The cat meowed insistently, its voice rising into an eerie wail that cut through the noise like a knife. The laughter stopped. Megan looked up, her heart skipping a beat. The cat's eyes seemed to glow in the dim light, its gaze fixed on her as if urging her to understand something important. It let out another wail, louder this time, and began pacing back and forth near the door. Okay, that's officially creepy, Jenkins said, his smirk faltering. It's just a cat, Brooks said, though his tone lacked its usual confidence. He stood, rubbing the back of his neck as he eyed the animal. Probably hungry or scared. Nothing to get worked up over. But Megan wasn't so sure. She'd seen plenty of stray animals in her time, and none of them had ever behaved like this. This cat wasn't just looking for food or a warm place to sleep, it was trying to lead her somewhere. She could feel it in her gut, the same way she always felt when something wasn't quite right on a call. She stood, grabbing her jacket and ignoring the amused looks from her colleagues. I'm going to follow it, she said simply. Brooks scoffed. You're kidding, right? No, Megan replied, her voice firm. Jenkins shook his head, leaning back in his chair with an exaggerated sigh. You're seriously going to follow a cat? Harlow, you do realize how insane that sounds, right? Call it a hunch, Megan said, meeting his gaze. A hunch, Brooks repeated, chuckling. Based on what? The way it meowed at you. Megan didn't bother answering. She had learned early on that arguing with them was a waste of time. Instead, she crouched down and gave the cat a reassuring pat. All right, buddy, she murmured. Show me what's so important. The cat meowed again, this time softer, almost as if it understood her. Then it turned and bolted toward the door, its movements quick and deliberate. Megan followed without hesitation. Unbelievable, Brooks muttered, shaking his head. You're on your own, Doolittle. Wouldn't have it any other way, Megan shot back, her tone sharper than usual. The night air was crisp as she stepped outside, the faint glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the empty sidewalks. The cat was already halfway down the block, its tail swishing like a beacon. Megan quickened her pace, her boots clicking against the pavement. Her radio crackled to life. Harlow, you good out there? It was Brooks, his voice laced with sarcasm. Fine, she replied curtly. Just checking, he said. Wouldn't want you to get lost on your big cat adventure. Megan ignored him, focusing instead on the feline guide ahead. The cat moved with purpose, darting around corners and slipping through narrow alleys. It paused occasionally to look back at her, as if making sure she was still following, before continuing its strange journey. The farther they went, the quieter the city seemed to become. The hum of traffic faded, replaced by the distant sound of water dripping and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The streets grew darker, the street lights fewer and farther between. Megan's grip tightened on her flashlight. Her instincts were on high alert, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. She wasn't sure where the cat was taking her, but every step felt like it was leading her deeper into something she wasn't prepared for. Finally, the cat stopped in front of a chain-link fence that surrounded an old, abandoned building. The structure loomed in the shadows, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. Megan recognized it immediately. The Baxter Warehouse. She frowned, her flashlight beam sweeping over the rusted fence and padlocked gate. The warehouse had been shut down for years, ever since the company that owned it went bankrupt. It was a popular spot for vandals and squatters, but nothing about it seemed out of the ordinary. Why here? Megan murmured, glancing down at the cat. The animal let out a low, mournful meow and slipped through a gap in the fence. Megan hesitated for a moment, her pulse quickening. She reached for her radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Harlow. I'm at the old Baxter Warehouse on 9th Street. Requesting backup for a possible investigation. Copy that, Harlow, came the reply. Units are en route. She slipped through the gap in the fence, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she approached the building. The cat was waiting for her by the side entrance, its eyes glowing like tiny lanterns in the gloom. The door was slightly ajar, the lock broken and hanging by a thread. Megan's heart pounded as she pushed it open, the hinges groaning loudly in protest. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, carrying the faint scent of mildew and decay. The cat darted ahead, its small frame disappearing into the shadows. Megan followed cautiously, her flashlight revealing a maze of broken furniture and scattered debris. She wasn't alone anymore. The tension in the air was palpable, each step drawing her closer to a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Megan's every sense was heightened as she stepped further into the abandoned Baxter Warehouse. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the floor beneath her boots and the soft padding of the cat as it darted ahead. The beam of her flashlight swept over cracked walls, discarded crates, and a faint trail of dirt that led deeper into the structure. "All right, buddy," she whispered to the cat, her voice barely audible. "What are we looking for?" The cat paused at a corner, its tail swishing. It meowed sharply, its voice echoing in the empty space. Megan's grip on her flashlight tightened. She wasn't sure what unnerved her more, the cat's eerie persistence or the oppressive stillness of the warehouse. A faint sound broke the silence, a rustling, like fabric brushing against metal. Megan froze, every muscle in her body tensing. She pointed her flashlight toward the source, but the light revealed only shadows that seemed to shift as the beam moved. She reached for her radio again. "Dispatch, this is Officer Harlow. I'm inside the Baxter Warehouse. Still waiting on backup. Possible signs of activity." "Copy, Harlow," came the reply. ETA for backup is 5 minutes. 5 minutes. It felt like an eternity. The cat let out another insistent meow and darted forward, vanishing around the corner. Megan followed, her steps cautious but quick. She didn't want to lose sight of her strange guide, not now. As she rounded the corner, her flashlight revealed a staircase leading down into what appeared to be a basement. The cat was already halfway down, its form barely visible in the dim light. Megan hesitated at the top of the stairs, her instincts screaming at her to wait for backup. But the cat turned and looked up at her, its glowing eyes filled with something that almost resembled urgency. It let out a low, mournful wail that sent a chill down her spine. "Okay," she muttered to herself. "Just a quick look. Then I'm out of here." She descended the stairs slowly, each step groaning under her weight. The air grew colder and heavier with every step, carrying a faint metallic tang that made her stomach churn. At the bottom, she found herself in a narrow hallway lined with rusted pipes and flickering lights. The cat was waiting for her at the far end, sitting perfectly still. Its gaze was fixed on a large metal door that looked out of place in the decrepit building. The door was dented and scratched, as though someone or something had tried desperately to get in or out. Megan approached cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the faint outlines of handprints smeared across the metal. Her stomach tightened. "Dispatch, this is Officer Harlow," she said into her radio, her voice low. "I've found a door in the basement of the warehouse. Looks like there's been some kind of struggle. I'm going to investigate further." "Copy that, Harlow," dispatch replied. "Backup is 3 minutes out. Proceed with caution." The cat let out another wail, its voice echoing eerily in the confined space. Megan reached for the door handle, her heart pounding in her chest. The handle was cold and sticky, as if coated in something she didn't want to think about. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room beyond was vast and dimly lit, with exposed beams casting long shadows across the floor. The air was colder here, and the metallic tang was stronger, almost overwhelming. In the center of the room stood a large, rusted table covered in what looked like old tools and equipment. And then she saw it. In the corner of the room, half hidden by shadows, was a figure slumped against the wall. Megan's breath caught in her throat as she moved closer, her flashlight revealing a man dressed in filthy, tattered clothes. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his breathing shallow. "Sir!" Megan called out, rushing to his side. "Can you hear me?" The man stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at her with a mixture of fear and relief, his voice barely above a whisper. "Help me." Megan grabbed her radio. "Dispatch, I've found a victim. Male, approximately mid-40s. He's conscious but barely responsive. Request immediate medical assistance." "Copy that, Harlow. EMS is en route." As she waited for backup, Megan noticed the cat sitting a few feet away, watching silently. Its demeanor had changed, it no longer seemed anxious or urgent. Instead, it sat calmly, its gaze steady and almost satisfied. "What is this place?" Megan muttered, glancing around the room. The man coughed weakly, drawing her attention back to him. They took us," he whispered. "Who?" Megan asked, leaning in closer. "Who took you?" Before he could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway behind her. Megan turned, her hand instinctively moving to her holstered weapon. "Officer Harlow," a familiar voice called out. It was Brooks, followed closely by 2 other officers. Relief washed over Megan as she stood and motioned them into the room. "In here," she said. "I found him like this. We need to secure the area." Brooks frowned as he surveyed the scene. "What the hell is this place?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Megan replied. The other officers began searching the room, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. One of them paused by the table, examining the tools scattered across its surface. "These don't look like they've been used for anything good," he said grimly. Megan turned her attention back to the man on the floor. "Sir, we're going to get you out of here, okay? Can you tell us who did this to you?" The man's lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes fluttered shut, and his breathing grew shallow. "Stay with me," Megan said urgently, shaking his shoulder. "Help is on the way." As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The cat, still sitting in the corner, watched her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the cat stood, stretched, and walked out of the room without a sound. "Megan," Brooks said, his voice low. "I think we've stumbled onto something a lot bigger than we expected." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the doorway where the cat had disappeared. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cat crouched low, its fur bristling as if warning them of what lay ahead. Megan felt a chill creep down her spine. The old warehouse loomed before them, its broken windows and sagging roof bathed in the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as though the building itself was alive and watching them. "This place gives me the creeps," Officer Daniels muttered, gripping his flashlight like a lifeline. Megan didn't reply. Her focus was on the cat, which now prowled forward, its tail swishing with purpose. It stopped at the rusted metal door, its gaze fixed on Megan. She swallowed hard, then turned to Brooks. "We have to go in," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Brooks frowned, his skepticism clear. "Harlow, it's an abandoned warehouse. Probably just some rats or squatters in there. Then why would it lead us here?" Megan shot back, her tone sharper than intended. Brooks hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. But we're doing this by the book. Daniels, Carter, cover the exits. Harlow, you're with me." The team split up, their footsteps crunching on the gravel as they moved into position. Megan took a deep breath and pulled open the door, the rusted hinges protesting loudly. Inside, the air was colder, carrying a faint scent of mildew and something else, something metallic and sour that made her stomach churn. The cat slipped inside ahead of her, its movements silent and deliberate. Megan's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of broken crates, shattered glass, and graffiti-covered walls. "What a dump," Brooks muttered, stepping in behind her. But Megan barely heard him. Her attention was on the faint, scuffed trail on the dusty floor, as though something or someone had been dragged through here. The cat followed the trail, pausing every few steps to glance back at Megan, as if to ensure she was still following. "This is insane," Brooks said, his voice low. "We're following a cat into an abandoned building in the middle of the night. If this ends up being nothing, you're buying coffee for the next month." Megan didn't respond. Her flashlight caught something ahead, an open hatch in the floor, the edges stained with a dark, sticky substance. Her heart skipped a beat. "Brooks," she said quietly, motioning toward the hatch. He stepped closer, his expression hardening as he saw the stains. "Blood." "Looks like it," Megan replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The cat meowed sharply, its cry echoing in the vast, empty space. Megan knelt by the hatch, shining her light into the opening. A ladder descended into the darkness below. "You've got to be kidding me," Brooks said, his voice tight. "A basement?" Megan nodded, her throat dry. "Looks like it." "I don't like this," Brooks muttered. "We should wait for backup." But the cat let out another wail, more insistent this time. It pawed at the edge of the hatch, its eyes fixed on Megan. "I'm going down," she said firmly, gripping the ladder. Brooks grabbed her arm. "Are you crazy? We don't know what's down there." "That's exactly why we need to find out," Megan replied, shaking him off. Stay here if you want, but I'm not ignoring this. Before he could protest further, she began her descent. The metal rungs were cold and slick, and the air grew colder with each step. Her flashlight barely pierced the gloom, revealing only concrete walls and an unsettling sense of emptiness. When she reached the bottom, she found herself in a narrow corridor lined with rusted pipes and faintly flickering lights. The cat was already there, waiting for her. Its eyes seemed to glow in the dim light, urging her forward. Brooks climbed down after her, grumbling under his breath. If we get ambushed down here, I'm blaming you. Megan ignored him, her focus on the faint sounds ahead: a rhythmic dripping, the hum of machinery, and something else, barely audible. It sounded like breathing. She raised her flashlight, the beam sweeping over the corridor. At the end, a heavy metal door loomed, slightly ajar. The dark stains on the floor led straight to it. Megan's pulse quickened. She motioned for Brooks to stay quiet as she approached the door, her hand hovering over her holstered weapon. The cat stayed close to her side, its movements eerily calm. When she pushed the door open, the scene inside made her stomach drop. The room was large and dimly lit, filled with strange equipment that looked like it belonged in a hospital or a torture chamber. Metal tables with restraints, cabinets overflowing with syringes and vials, and a faint metallic smell that made her gag. In the corner, a figure was slumped against the wall, bound and unconscious. Brooks, call it in, Megan said urgently, rushing to the figure. Brooks fumbled for his radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Brooks. We've got a hostage situation at the Baxter warehouse. Send backup and medical, now. As Megan reached the man, she checked for a pulse. It was weak but steady. His face was pale and gaunt, his clothes filthy and torn. Sir, can you hear me? She asked, gently shaking his shoulder. The man's eyes fluttered open, and he let out a weak moan. Help me. We've got you, Megan said, her voice firm but soothing. You're safe now. The cat sat nearby, its eyes fixed on the man. It let out a low, mournful meow, as if sharing in his pain. Megan's mind raced as she surveyed the room. Who had done this? And why? The equipment, the restraints, this wasn't random. It was planned, deliberate. Brooks, she said, her voice tight. This is bigger than we thought. I can see that, he replied, his face pale. What the hell is this place? Before Megan could answer, the man let out a gasp, his eyes widening in terror. They're coming, he whispered, his voice trembling. They'll come back. Megan's blood ran cold. Who? She demanded. Who's coming? But the man's strength gave out, and he slumped back into unconsciousness. Megan's grip tightened on her flashlight as she turned to Brooks. We need to get him out of here. Now. The cat meowed sharply, its ears flattening against its head. It darted toward the door, its movements frantic. What's it doing now? Brooks muttered. Megan didn't answer. She had a sinking feeling that the man's warning wasn't just paranoia. Let's move, she said, her voice firm. As they began to lift the man, the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor outside. The sound of approaching footsteps froze Megan in place. Each step was deliberate, echoing ominously in the silence. She exchanged a tense glance with Brooks, who instinctively reached for his sidearm. The cat, still near the door, let out a low growl, its fur bristling. Did you hear that? Brooks whispered, his voice barely audible. Megan nodded, her pulse pounding in her ears. We need to move now. They hoisted the unconscious man between them, his limp body heavier than expected. Megan's grip tightened as she tried to focus on their immediate escape route. The cat darted ahead, pausing to look back at them, as if urging them to hurry. The footsteps grew louder, closer, accompanied by faint, muffled voices. This way, Megan hissed, following the cat. It led them back down the narrow corridor, its movements swift and deliberate. Every step felt agonizingly slow, the weight of the man slowing them down. Behind them, the voices became clearer. "Check the basement," one voice barked, sharp and authoritative. "No loose ends." Megan's breath caught. Whoever these people were, they weren't here for a casual inspection. "We're sitting ducks down here," Brooks muttered, his grip tightening on the man's arm. "We'll make it," Megan replied, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The corridor twisted sharply, leading to a secondary staircase. The cat darted up the steps, its tail flicking urgently. Megan and Brooks followed, dragging the man between them. The stairs creaked under their weight, the sound amplified in the tense silence. Megan's flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, they were plunged into near darkness. Her heart leaped, but the beam returned just as quickly. "We need to get to the main floor," she whispered. As they ascended, the voices below grew louder, more agitated. "They're close," Brooks said through gritted teeth. The cat reached the top of the stairs first, pausing to sniff the air before slipping through a cracked door. Megan pushed it open wider, revealing a vast storage area cluttered with old machinery and stacks of decaying boxes. "Over there," she said, spotting a large piece of equipment that could provide temporary cover. They hurried toward it, setting the man down carefully. Megan crouched low, peering through the gaps between the machinery. The cat sat beside her, its ears twitching as it listened. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. The voices were clearer now. "They couldn't have gone far," the first voice said. "Search everywhere," another ordered. Megan's fingers hovered over her radio. She needed to signal backup, but the risk of noise was too great. Her heart pounded as she weighed the options. The cat suddenly bolted, slipping between the crates and disappearing into the shadows. "Where's it going now?" Brooks hissed. "I don't know," Megan replied, her eyes scanning the room. Moments later, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Megan flinched, her gaze snapping to the source of the noise. The cat had knocked over a stack of boxes, sending them tumbling to the ground. The voices below paused, then grew more agitated. "Over there," one of them shouted. Footsteps thundered in the direction of the noise. Megan realized what the cat had done. It had created a distraction. "This is our chance," she whispered, motioning for Brooks to help lift the man again. They moved quickly, weaving through the maze of crates and machinery. The exit was inside a heavy metal door partially ajar. Megan's heart raced as they approached, her ears straining for any sign that the pursuers were onto them. The cat reappeared, darting ahead to the door. It meowed once, loudly, before slipping through the opening. As Megan and Brooks reached the door, the sound of footsteps shifted. "They're doubling back," Brooks said, his voice tight. Megan pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit alley. The cool night air hit her face, a sharp contrast to the stale, oppressive atmosphere inside. "This way," she said, leading them into the alley. The cat was already ahead, its movements confident and purposeful. Megan didn't question it anymore. She followed without hesitation, Brooks close behind. They wound through a series of alleys, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter. Finally, they emerged onto a quiet street, where the distant wail of sirens brought a wave of relief. "Backup's almost here," Brooks said, glancing over his shoulder. Megan nodded, her grip on the man tightening. They moved toward the approaching patrol cars, their headlights cutting through the darkness. As the officers arrived, Megan quickly relayed what had happened. Paramedics rushed to tend to the unconscious man, while others secured the perimeter. The cat sat calmly on the sidewalk, its wide eyes watching the scene unfold. "What about the people in the warehouse?" one of the officers asked. "They're still in there," Megan replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. We need to sweep the place. As the officers moved to secure the warehouse, Megan knelt beside the cat. You knew, didn't you? She murmured, scratching behind its ears. The cat purred softly, its demeanor calm and almost smug. Brooks crouched beside her, shaking his head. I still can't believe we just followed a cat into all of this. Megan managed a faint smile. Sometimes, you have to trust your instincts. Or in this case, trust the cat. The cat meowed, as if in agreement. But even as the immediate danger passed, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The warehouse, the equipment, the people behind it all pointed to something much larger, something far more sinister. And the cat? It wasn't just a stray. It was a guide, a messenger, leading them toward a truth they were only beginning to uncover. As Megan pushed the warehouse door further open, the groan of rusted hinges echoed ominously through the cavernous space. The air was thick, damp, and oppressive, carrying with it the unmistakable tang of iron. She fought the urge to gag as the smell intensified, a nauseating blend of decay and despair. Her flashlight trembled slightly in her grip as she swept the beam across the room. Shadows danced on the walls, stretching like ghostly fingers. What the light revealed, however, made her breath catch in her throat. Chains hung from the ceiling, their links smeared with something dark and sticky. The floor was stained with splatters that told stories of violence and struggle. In one corner, makeshift tables were littered with tools sharp, crude, and terrifying in their purpose. Brooks stepped in behind her, his usually sarcastic demeanor replaced by stunned silence. His flashlight joined hers, illuminating more of the grisly scene. Jesus, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. What the hell is this place? A faint rustling sound made them both spin, their lights converging on a far corner of the room. There, huddled against the wall, was a man. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt and bruised, and his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and desperation. Help me, he croaked, his voice hoarse and broken. Megan took a cautious step forward, but Brooks grabbed her arm. Wait, he warned, his eyes scanning the room. At the man's feet, the cat sat poised, its body low to the ground and its fur bristling. Its green eyes gleamed in the dim light, watching Megan intently. It let out a low, menacing hiss, its tail lashing back and forth. What's it doing? Brooks whispered, his voice tight with unease. Megan shook her head, her gaze shifting between the man and the cat. I don't know, she replied. But deep down, she felt the cat was trying to communicate something important. The man tried to crawl toward them, but the cat stepped in front of him, its body language protective and defiant. Wait, Megan said, holding up a hand to stop the man's movements. Who did this to you? What happened here? The man's lips quivered, and tears spilled down his cheeks. They'll come back, he whispered, his voice trembling. They'll kill us all if they find out I talked. Megan crouched down, keeping her flashlight steady. Who? Who will come back? Before the man could answer, a loud crash echoed from deeper within the warehouse. Both officers jumped, their flashlights darting toward the source of the noise. They're here, the man screamed, his voice breaking. It's them. The cat hissed again, its fur standing on end as it darted toward the noise. Megan and Brooks exchanged a quick glance, the unspoken agreement clear, they needed to move, and fast. Help him up, Megan said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Brooks moved to the man, pulling him to his feet as Megan scanned the room. Her flashlight landed on a side door partially hidden behind a stack of crates. Over there, she said, motioning toward it. As they made their way toward the exit, the sound of hurried footsteps grew louder. The faint glow of flashlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. They're closing in, Brooks said, his voice tense. The cat darted ahead, reaching the door first. It meowed loudly, then clawed at the base of the door as if urging them to hurry. Megan pushed the door open, revealing a narrow hallway that led to another set of stairs. They hurried through, the man limping between them, his breathing ragged and shallow. The cat stayed ahead, its movements quick and purposeful. Megan couldn't help but feel that it knew exactly where it was going. The hallway ended at another door, this one marked with a rusted padlock. Megan's heart sank, but the cat didn't stop. It jumped onto a nearby crate, then onto a metal shelf, its weight causing a loose panel on the ceiling to shift. "There's another way," Megan said, pointing to the cat's discovery. Brooks helped the man onto the crate, then boosted him up through the opening. Megan followed, her arms straining as she pulled herself up. Brooks was the last to climb, the panel sliding back into place just as the footsteps reached the door below. They found themselves in a cramped attic space, the air stifling and filled with dust. The cat led them across the beams, its movements sure and steady. Megan tried to mimic its steps, careful not to make a sound. As they moved, the man whispered, "They're not just criminals. They're monsters." Megan glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "They take people," he said, his voice barely audible. "Experiment on them. They're looking for something. Something unnatural." Before Megan could ask more, the attic space opened up to another staircase. The cat descended first, its tail flicking as it disappeared into the shadows below. Megan followed, her heart pounding. The staircase led to another room, this one lined with filing cabinets and old computer equipment. She shone her flashlight on the cabinets, her eyes scanning the labels. "Brooks, look at this," she said, pulling open a drawer. Inside were files, each marked with a name and a photo. She flipped through them quickly, her stomach twisting as she recognized faces, people who had been reported missing over the past year. "This is a record," Brooks said, his voice grim. "A record of everyone they've taken." The man slumped against the wall, his eyes filled with sorrow. "They won't stop," he said. "Not until someone makes them." Megan's flashlight landed on a stack of blueprints and documents spread across a table. She moved closer, her eyes scanning the pages. They detailed not just the warehouse but several other locations, all connected in a sprawling network. "This isn't just a hideout," she said. "It's a hub. Part of something much bigger." The cat jumped onto the table, its paw landing on one of the blueprints. Megan looked at it closely, her breath catching as she realized what it marked: a facility in the heart of the city, hidden in plain sight. "This is where it all leads," she said, her voice firm. "We have to stop them." The cat meowed, its green eyes locking with hers. It seemed to nod, as if affirming her resolve. In that moment, Megan understood. The cat hadn't just brought them to the warehouse to save one man. It had brought them here to uncover the truth that would change everything. And they were only scratching the surface. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the hum of old electrical equipment. Megan felt a surge of determination as she sifted through the blueprints, her fingers trembling with the weight of the discovery. This wasn't just a crime scene, it was the tip of an iceberg, one that threatened to submerge countless lives in darkness if they didn't act quickly. The cat, now perched on the table, let out another low, throaty meow. Its emerald eyes seemed to pierce through the gloom, as if urging her to keep moving. Megan turned to Brooks, who was flipping through the files with growing alarm. "They've been operating under our noses for years," Brooks muttered, shaking his head. "This isn't some small-time operation. Look at these connections: politicians, corporations. They've got people everywhere." The man they had rescued groaned, clutching his side. His face was pale, and his breathing shallow, but his gaze was steady. "You don't understand," he rasped. "This isn't just about power or money. They're searching for something, something alive. Megan knelt beside him, her brow furrowed. What do you mean? What are they looking for? He hesitated, his eyes darting to the cat. The animal returned his stare with an intensity that seemed almost human. It's tied to the cat, he finally whispered. They've been after it for years. It escaped, but it came back, for you. For me. Megan echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded. You're the only one who can stop them. That cat didn't choose you by chance. Brooks snorted, his skepticism breaking through the tension. Okay, now this is getting a little too Twilight Zone for me. It's a cat, Megan. A smart one, sure, but let's not go assigning magical powers here. The cat hissed sharply, its tail lashing. Brooks stepped back, holding up his hands. Fine, fine. I'll shut up. Megan felt a strange connection to the animal, as if it had been guiding her all along. She turned back to the man. What do they want with it? What's so special about this cat? It's not just a cat, the man said, his voice barely audible. It's a guardian. It knows things, secrets they've spent decades trying to uncover. They think if they capture it, they'll have control over something ancient. Brooks sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Great. So now we're dealing with ancient secrets and a mystical cat. What's next? Curses. Megan ignored him, her mind racing. If the cat was a guardian, then its actions leading them here, uncovering the files, protecting the man weren't random. It had a purpose, and she was somehow part of it. She stood, her jaw set. We need to get this information back to the precinct, she said. If we're going to stop them, we'll need backup. The man shook his head violently. No. If they find out you've seen this, they'll destroy everything and everyone. You can't go through normal channels. They have people everywhere, even in the police. Brooks stiffened. Are you saying we've been compromised? The man nodded. Completely. They'll know the moment you make a move. Megan's heart sank. She had always believed in the system, in the idea that justice could prevail if they worked together. But now, the system itself was tainted, and she couldn't trust anyone but herself and, inexplicably, the cat. The feline jumped down from the table, padding silently to a corner of the room. It pawed at a loose floorboard, its movements deliberate. Megan crouched beside it, prying the board loose to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, metallic device, sleek, unmarked, and humming faintly with energy. What is this? She asked, holding it up. The man's eyes widened in fear. That's what they've been searching for, he said. It's the key to everything. Before Megan could ask more, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Brooks cursed under his breath, drawing his gun. We've got company. The cat let out a guttural growl, its ears flattening against its head. Megan quickly pocketed the device and grabbed the blueprints, stuffing them into her bag. Let's move, she said, pulling the man to his feet. They made their way back through the attic, the cat leading the charge. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the low murmur of voices. Whoever was coming wasn't just searching, they were hunting. Brooks covered their retreat, his gun trained on the door as they climbed back through the ceiling panel. Hurry up, he hissed, his usual sarcasm replaced by genuine urgency. The group moved as quickly as they could, navigating the maze of beams and crawl spaces. The cat never hesitated, its path precise and unwavering. Megan couldn't shake the feeling that it had been here before, that it knew every inch of the building. They emerged onto the roof, the cool night air hitting their faces like a slap. Megan scanned the area, her eyes landing on a fire escape that led down to the alley below. Go, she said, motioning for the others to descend. As they climbed down, gunshots rang out from the building. Brooks cursed, returning fire as their pursuers appeared on the roof. The cat darted ahead, its movements swift and calculated. They reached the ground, sprinting through the alley as more shots rang out. The man stumbled, his injuries slowing him down, but Megan and Brooks pulled him along. The cat stopped at the end of the alley, turning to face them. Its eyes gleamed in the moonlight, urging them forward. "Where now?" Brooks asked, panting. The cat meowed and took off, leading them into the labyrinth of the city. Megan didn't hesitate, trusting it completely. They ducked into an abandoned subway tunnel, the darkness swallowing them whole. The cat's glowing eyes guided them as they moved deeper into the underground. Finally, they reached a hidden alcove, a small room carved into the stone. The cat jumped onto a table, its tail curling around its body as it watched them. Megan set the man down gently, her mind racing. She pulled out the device, studying it in the dim light. "This is the key," she murmured. "But to what?" The man shook his head. "Not what. Who? It's a key to her." He pointed to the cat, his finger trembling. Megan's breath caught as the cat's green eyes seemed to glow brighter. For the first time, she felt the weight of what she had stumbled into, a conspiracy that went far beyond anything she could have imagined. And the cat was at the center of it all. The warehouse was no longer cloaked in silence and shadows. It bustled with activity as more officers and forensic teams arrived, their flashlights bouncing off the cold, concrete walls. What was once a hidden chamber of horrors was now an exposed crime scene, its secrets spilled out for all to see. Megan watched as bags of evidence were catalogued and carried out, chains, documents, bloodied tools, and devices designed for torture. Each item told its own grim story, painting a picture of the cruelty that had taken place here. The atmosphere was heavy, yet filled with a sense of purpose. This wasn't just a random bust, it was the unraveling of something much larger. She stood near the cat, now perched on the hood of a squad car. Its green eyes reflected the flashing red and blue lights, giving it an almost ethereal glow. For the first time since she'd found it, Megan noticed how relaxed the animal seemed. Its ears, once pinned back in fear, were now upright. It purred softly, as if content with the night's outcome. "Looks like you just solved the case of the year," Megan whispered, gently scratching behind the cat's ears. Sergeant Brooks approached, his usual smirk replaced with a rare expression of respect. He gestured to the man they had rescued, who was now being checked by paramedics. "Turns out our mystery guy is Mark Haynes. He's an investigative journalist who went missing 6 months ago. Guess he got too close to the truth, and they decided to make him disappear." Megan raised an eyebrow. "And the cat?" Brooks shrugged, his face softening. "According to Haynes, it's been keeping tabs on him, sneaking in and out of their hideouts. He says it even brought him scraps of food while he was chained up. If you ask me, that's one hell of a lucky stray." Megan smiled but said nothing. She wasn't sure she believed in luck. Another officer approached, carrying a laptop wrapped in an evidence bag. "You're gonna want to see this," he said. The laptop was opened on the hood of a car, and Megan leaned in as the officer clicked through folders. Files popped up, each one more incriminating than the last. Names, transactions, locations, it was all there, a web of corruption that reached far beyond the warehouse. Politicians, business leaders, even law enforcement officials, people in positions of power who had turned a blind eye or, worse, played an active role in the trafficking ring. Megan's stomach churned as she recognized a few names. "This is huge," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Brooks nodded grimly. "This could bring down half the city's elite. No wonder they went to such lengths to keep it hidden." The realization hit Megan like a freight train. This wasn't just about justice for the victims, it was about dismantling a system that had allowed such horrors to thrive. And it had all started with a cat scratching at the precinct door. As dawn began to break, the scene at the warehouse quieted. The evidence was loaded into vans, and the suspects who had been captured during the raid were escorted into police cars, their faces pale with the weight of their crimes. The once imposing warehouse now stood empty, its secrets laid bare for the world to see. Megan walked back to her own car, exhaustion setting in. The cat followed her, jumping into the passenger seat as if it had always belonged there. She glanced at it, shaking her head with a tired smile. "You really are something else, you know that." The cat blinked slowly, its green eyes filled with an almost knowing expression. At the precinct, the mood was electric. Officers who had doubted Megan now approached her with nods of respect and murmured congratulations. The case was already making headlines, and news vans had begun to gather outside. Sergeant Brooks clapped Megan on the shoulder. "You did good, Harlow. Really good. You've earned yourself a few days off after this one." "Thanks, Sarge," Megan said, her voice laced with gratitude. Before she could leave, the rescue journalist, Mark Haynes, approached her. He looked healthier now, though the shadows of his ordeal lingered in his eyes. "I owe you my life," he said, his voice steady but heartfelt. "If you hadn't followed that cat, I'd still be in that hellhole. And who knows how many others would have suffered." "It wasn't just me," Megan replied, glancing at the cat. "Looks like we all owe this little guy something." Haynes nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You know, in some cultures, they say cats are guardians of the unseen. After what I've been through, I might just start believing that." As the day wore on, Megan sat at her desk, reviewing the files they had recovered. Each name on the list represented another piece of the puzzle, another step toward dismantling the ring. She knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time, she felt like she was truly making a difference. The cat remained by her side, curled up on a blanket she'd laid out for it. Every so often, it would stretch or let out a soft meow, as if reminding her it was still there. Later that evening, as she prepared to head home, Megan picked up the cat and cradled it in her arms. "I guess you're coming with me," she said with a chuckle. "Can't have you solving any more cases without backup." The cat purred in response, nuzzling against her cheek. As she stepped outside, the city was alive with the buzz of reporters and onlookers. She held the cat close, her steps steady despite the chaos around her. In her heart, she knew this was just the beginning. Justice had been served that day, but the fight wasn't over. The city still had secrets, and Megan was ready to uncover them one case at a time. And she knew she wouldn't be doing it alone. As the precinct doors closed behind her, the cat let out one final, triumphant meow, its voice carrying into the night like a promise. Together, they had faced the darkness and won. And together, they would face whatever came next. The night was quiet now, the kind of stillness that settles after a storm. The chaos at the warehouse had subsided, the headlines already shifting to the next big story. The world would soon forget the faces of the men and women who had been brought to justice, but for Megan, the memories of tonight would linger far longer. She leaned back in her chair at her small apartment, a cup of coffee in her hands. The city outside her window buzzed, its lights flickering like stars in the distance. It felt peaceful, almost surreal. In one night, everything had changed. She'd started the evening as just another rookie officer, unsure of herself, unsure of what the future held. Now, she knew something she hadn't before: she had a place in this fight. She was part of something bigger than herself. She looked down at the small bundle curled up beside her, the cat sleeping soundly on a patchwork blanket she'd set out for it. The tiny creature, who had started the night as nothing more than an oddity, had become her partner in crime solving. If someone had told her that a stray cat would be the one to lead her into the heart of a human trafficking ring, she would have laughed. But now, as she watched it breathe softly in its sleep, she realized just how powerful a single, unexpected ally could be. The cat had been more than just a guide, it had been a silent mentor. It had trusted her when no one else did. It had shown her how to listen to the things others ignored, like the quiet whispers in the dark, the overlooked details, the instincts that spoke louder than logic. It had been the kind of partner that reminded her that true strength wasn't always in the obvious places. Sometimes, it was in the most surprising and silent of forms. Megan smiled to herself, the memory of the night's events playing back like a film in her mind. From the moment the cat had scratched at the precinct door, she had known something was off. At first, everyone had laughed. They had thought it was just another stray, another ridiculous distraction. But Megan had felt it, the urgency, the need. And she had listened. She had trusted her instincts, even when the case seemed ridiculous, even when her own colleagues were skeptical. She hadn't given up, not when the trail led them to dead ends or when the danger grew. She had pushed forward because deep down, she knew that the truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. And when the cat had meowed, when it had led them to the heart of the operation, it had been the confirmation that her hunch was right. Sometimes, Megan thought, that's all it takes. Not the fancy training or the knowledge from years on the force. Sometimes, it's just trusting your gut, trusting that little voice that tells you to keep going when everyone else wants to quit. She had learned that, tonight more than ever. And maybe, just maybe, that was the lesson she needed to learn in this job. The city outside continued to hum, oblivious to the dangers that had been uncovered in the shadows, but Megan wasn't oblivious. She had seen the darkness, but she had also seen the light that could come from it. She had seen the way the smallest actions, the quietest voices, could break through the silence and make a difference. Sometimes, she murmured aloud, heroes come in unexpected forms. A stray cat with a mission, a rookie officer with a hunch. Her gaze fell on the cat again, its tail flicking in its sleep, and she couldn't help but laugh softly. Who would have thought that she would be sitting here, reflecting on a night that had started with the most unlikely of partners? She took a deep breath, feeling something settle inside her, a sense of accomplishment, yes, but also a realization that the fight didn't stop here. The cases would continue to come. The city would keep turning, and there would be new challenges to face. But Megan wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She glanced at the cat, now stretching its legs and blinking slowly up at her as if it could read her thoughts. Guess we owe you one, partner, she said, her voice soft with gratitude. The cat responded with a small, almost imperceptible meow, as if to say, you're welcome. It was a sound so simple, yet in that moment, it was everything. The message was clear, Megan wasn't alone in this. She had a partner, and sometimes, that's all it takes to make a difference. As the cat curled up once more, content and peaceful, Megan sat back in her chair, a quiet sense of pride filling her chest. She had made it through this case, but more importantly, she had learned something about herself. She wasn't the rookie anymore. She was someone who could be counted on. Someone who could find the truth, no matter how well it was hidden. The road ahead would be long, and there would be more cases, more dangers, more moments when the world seemed too big and too broken to fix. But now, she knew how to face it all. With courage. With trust. And with a little help from her unlikely partner. The world might not have noticed yet, but Megan had just begun. She had learned that it wasn't the badge or the title that made someone a hero. It was the willingness to act, to listen when others wouldn't, and to trust in the unexpected moments that could change everything. And sometimes, the greatest heroes came in the smallest forms, like a stray cat, meowing in the night. Megan smiled again, as the cat let out another satisfied purr. Tomorrow was another day, another case, another opportunity to make a difference. But for now, she was content to sit back, knowing that even in the quietest moments, heroes were always waiting to be found. And she would always be ready to listen.